Smurf here in Golden, Colorado, and as promised, we are going to give you the tour of Golden Moon Distillery. We're going to see how whiskey, gin, and so many other things are made. Steven's going to give us the tour, so let's get this going. And as promised, we are at Golden Moon Distillery. Stephen Gould, of course.
Hey, everybody.
Master distiller. I know he hates the title, but it's one with honor and integrity. And you're going to show us how you got this title, but more importantly, you're going to show us how this is made.
Yeah, so these are some of our products. This is triple. This is our Irish-style triple distilled Colorado single malt. On the podcast the other day, we were drinking this product, which is Principium, our young single malt. Took a gold medal at the World Spirits Competition 2019. This is triple. This took a gold medal in 2021 at the World's double gold medal 2021 World Spirits Competition. Essentially the same whiskey but distilled 3 times. All malted barley, malted right here in Golden, grain to glass right here at Golden Moon Distillery. So we're going to show you how we make it. We're going to have a little fun. We're going to show you a few other things. Our weird, wacky, crazy distillery. And Smurf and I are going to talk a little bit about this, that, and the other thing.
My mouth is just watering looking at. I love the bar. This is spectacular. You even have like your trophy back there.
So this was the Distillery of the Year in 2019 by the American Distilling Institute. I believe we were the 11th in history distillery in the United States to get this award. And we've won numerous other awards. There's a bunch on the wall over here. This is our little kind of entryway bar, if you will. People walk in off the street and say, hey, you know, I want to buy a quick bottle. Here we are.
So let's get the tour on so that I can get some of that in me as soon as possible.
Fair enough.
All
Let's
right.
go. So let me show you our herb room.
All right.
So
this is where the magic happens.
Well, it's part of where the magic happens. So this is all herbs, spices, botanicals. We use the best materials we can find. In some cases that means it's locally grown. In some cases it means that we're going to go to the far ends of the earth, if you will, to get the best quality material we can get. Everything you see in these orange bags here are botanicals that we have grown ourselves.
Oh, wow.
These were all grown at Fruition Farms, which up until last summer was the farm owned by Alex Seidel, who's a local James Beard Award-winning chef.
So how much of your ingredients are locally sourced?
It depends on the product. I'm not someone that's going to say, ooh, local. I'm someone that's going to say, ooh, I want the best I can get to make the best product I can. So with our barley for our single malt, that means working with the local malt house right down the street.
Right.
And using malt that's been grown in Colorado, Idaho, and Wyoming. But with, for example, the box right behind you, this material right here, this is actually French ultra culinary grade lavender for our gin.
Oh.
And we work with farmers in the south of France for that.
Is that what I'm smelling?
That's what you're smelling.
And I mean, it just permeates the walls. Like, I mean,
So
and you come in
this,
here and that is the
in
scent.
this room, we have herbs, spices, botanicals from probably 30 countries. And probably 150 different herbs, spices, and botanicals that we're going to use. That's everything from juniper to lavender to Buddha's hand citron to grand wormwood, petite wormwood, mugwort, star anise, green anise.
Caraway, which I know because when I worked at a kosher bakery, would make right
Exactly.
caraway
So,
seeds.
and that caraway is used in our kumel. So kumel is a Central European liqueur.
So from here, where do we go next?
I'm going to show you the rest of the distillery.
We go this away.
So this is Stillhouse number 1. This is where we started when we moved into this facility.
Okay.
So I've been distilling off and on for about 30 years. We moved into this facility in 2010, so we've been around for a while. At that point in time, it was a very small operation. I was running another business out of what is now our office here. And I'd had these antique stills, both of which are running currently.
So there's no shelf life on the stills. As long as they're together, they work.
As long as you keep cobbling together. And so let's talk about this still. This is a 1933 DeRoy Simplex Alembic, and it is running as we speak.
I know, I can feel the heat coming off of it.
It is running Applejack. If you look behind you, you can actually see, and you can stick your finger in there and taste it.
Yeah, I'll believe you.
That's right at the front end, so it's going to have some bitter notes, but that'll all blend out.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Okay.
And this particular type of still was designed for vintners, orchard owners, farmers to be able to make their own alcohol products off of their own produce and then throw it in the barn for the rest of the year. So it doesn't have any gaskets. It's all water joints.
Right.
This one was used by one family for 4 generations until I bought it from them. I brought it back from France. Obviously, we've modified it heavily to keep it running. Originally, it was wood-fired, then it was propane-fired for a while. It's now plumbed with modern safety controls. It's natural gas-fired. I keep it a little dirty, and the reason I do is this copper is almost 100 years old. And if you keep polishing and cleaning it, the copper will wear out.
Right.
And I want to keep this alive as long as I can because it makes beautiful brandy. It's a very cool old still. It's all hand pounded, hand shaped. It's all dovetail construction.
Yeah, I can like right along the top. That is
And so they've actually used bronze solder to hold it together. So this is all pre-World War II technology. Wow. Now, of course, this is modern stainless. We put that on.
Of course.
But we use this almost every single day. All of our grappas are made on this. All of our Applejack brandy's made on this. If I could find 20 of these, I'd buy them.
That's great. I love that.
So then the next still we want to talk about is the still behind me. So this is what we refer to as a Black Forest still because this style still came from the Black Forest region of Germany.
It really looks steampunky.
It does look steampunky, and it is sort of the great-grandfather of most of the German stills that you see craft distillers around the world using.
Oh, wow.
All your Carl Engineering, Bavarian Holstein, Mueller, they're all sort of based on this same concept. I own 4 of these. There's obviously 2 in this room. One sort of hiding behind the totes here that we're pulling apple cider out of. This is currently running. We're actually running dry curacao today on this. So as you can see,
same thing, same.
Taste it.
Oh, wow. Whoa. That's like rubbing alcohol.
Yeah, but taste the secondary flavor. It's early in the run. So earlier in the run, you're going to get a higher alcohol by volume.
Yeah.
But you're starting to get both the orange and some of the spices that we add. Our curacao, our orange liqueur, uses actual curacao orange peel. Then we use a variety of other spices in our curacao as well. A little cinnamon, a little mace, a little nutmeg. And then when we're done, we're actually going to add a little saffron for color, flavor, aroma, and mouthfeel. And as you can see, again, it's old. We've done some repairs. The original condenser failed. We kept the guts of the condenser and used a modern stainless tub. All the pressure valves, all the gaskets and everything have been updated with modern equipment.
This is beautiful looking though.
And when we get next door into still house number 2, you're going to see I have a whole bunch of other antique stills. So I have a thing for antique stills.
Nothing wrong with that.
One of my biggest frustrations with most modern distillers is they're going to go out and buy the most expensive, highly efficient still they can buy. All the columns and plates and etc. And the science and engineering of distillation is really the optimization of the extraction of ethanol from whatever you fermented. So any ferment is a mix of alcohol, water, and other chemicals. And the more efficient your equipment, the more efficient you are at isolating just ethanol and extracting it. The problem with that is what gives spirits their character is all the other stuff.
The flavors.
So these antique stills that you see here are less efficient. The artistry of distillation is managing the efficiency, the inefficiencies, so that you get all these other chemicals in there so that you get a complex spirit that has some depth and feeling to it.
Some body.
Some complexity. So this is our big juniper tree here in the parking lot. Now, along with being a production distiller, we also do a lot of training here at Golden Moon. And we bring students in and teach them about botanical distillation and gin production. We make them come out here in the parking lot, and they're literally going to take and they're going to pick berries off the tree, and we're going to have them break them up, macerate them, and they're going to distill a single botanical distillate. And it comes out with this beautiful juniper flavor. This is what's called a Utah juniper. And of course, these juniper berries are the basis for gin. So a single botanical distillate of juniper is going to not be quite a gin, but it's going to be in that direction. But at least it shows them from the raw plant to a final spirit how it's made.
So back over here, because now we're on the outside, and we have your giant.
Our silo.
This is your silo, which I thought was decorative. I'm not going
decorative.
to lie to you. We pulled up and I'm like, wow, that's a handy, eye-catching, decorative little bit. But this is an actual functioning silo.
Correct. So this silo is purposely built for us. It's purposely sized for our needs. It holds 56,000 pounds of malted barley.
Holy moly.
That is 1,600 bushels of grain. And so what that means is a truckload is 1,000 to 1,200 bushels.
Okay.
We can call the local malt house, which is right down the road. They fill it with a truckload. We run it until it hits the cone. Then we can call and there's room for another entire truckload. So we can just continue to run and never blank the silo, never run out of grain.
Wow, okay.
And so for this particular silo, we only use it for malted barley.
Okay.
When we built out the larger production facility, which is Stillhouse number 2, you were just in number 1. Stillhouse number 2 is designed to allow us to scale on all our products, but with a heavy emphasis on the production of Colorado single malt whiskey.
Right.
Which is made from malted barley, which is why we've got the big silo. Now we do other things with other grains, but they come in bags and they're much smaller. The vast majority of the grain to glass whiskey we make here, plus our shochu, is all 100% malted barley.
Right, and that's in here.
And that's in here.
All right, let's go. So this is the second Stillhouse.
Stillhouse number 2.
Okay.
So we take malted barley, it comes into the silo here, we store it in the silo, and then we auger it into this building.
Through the pipe.
Through the auger into our 4-roller mill. Now this 4-roller mill, you go to Scotland, you're gonna mostly see 4-roller mills. Some will do 6-roller mills. Here in America, a lot of your breweries, a lot of your distillers are using 2-roller mills. Some use 4-roller mills. These are roller mills, so they're really good for malted barley. If I were doing corn, wheat, or rye, I'd probably be using a hammer mill. But because we're so focused on malt whiskey, this is what we're using. This is a Sasquatch.
I was gonna say.
It's a Sasquatch roller mill.
That's great.
We got it from Malt Handling Corporation of America.
Okay.
This particular one is the envy of many other brewers and distillers in Colorado, because while Sasquatch has been around for a long time, most of the Sasquatch mills that you see in use, at least here in Colorado, are the prior generation, which means they're not dust free. So they have to build a containment area to keep dust from moving around, and they can channel explosions.
Oh, okay.
Because with dust, you get explosion risk.
Right.
Ours is dust free, and I just set it on the floor and bolted down.
There you go. We've gone squatching.
So what comes out of this is what we call grist.
Okay.
And so grist is a mixture of coarse and various finer particles of now ground up barley.
Okay.
Then it's going to be augered through this pipe into this vessel. Now this vessel is called a lauter tun, where the vessel behind me over here is a mash tun. Now the lauter tun is what we use to mash our barley and then lauter our barley. So mashing is the process where we juggle temperatures of hot water to cause the enzymes in the grain to convert starch into sugar, so that when we ferment it, the yeast can do what it does.
Right.
Then lautering is the separation of solids from liquid. And so this particular vessel has a perforated floor, and because there's liquid in here right now, I can't show you that.
Right.
But then there's a manifold down here. And so when we're done mashing, we will drain that liquid off or lauter it and pump that into our fermenters. And then we'll take those solids, and those solids will then be given to local farms and ranches to use as feed.
Oh, wow, okay.
And the other thing we're getting ready to do with this, we're running experiments with a couple of commercial mushroom growers to grow mushrooms off of this spent grain.
Wow.
So we don't want to waste anything if at all possible here at
Right.
Golden Moon. Once this essentially unfermented beer comes out of the lauter tun, it goes into the fermenters. But before we look at the fermenters, I want to show you one more thing.
Okay.
And that's right over here. So this vessel is called a mash tun.
Mash agitator.
Mashing is the process like I just described,
Right.
where we convert starch into sugar. So for barley, we're going to separate out the solids and just put the liquids into the fermenter. However, if we're going to make a bourbon and a rye, or say a multi-grain Irish-style pot still whiskey,
Right.
which we've done on this vessel because we've done a lot of prototyping for folks in Ireland, we're going to take and we're going to use this vessel. We're going to use it for two purposes. The first purpose is we're going to use it to cook the grain. Now, the reason we need to cook the grain, things like corn, wheat, rye, etc., the gelatinization temperature is so high that you have to cook the grain, where you don't have to do that with barley. So we use this vessel for that, and then we drop the temperature down and mash. Now the reason we don't use the lauter tun for that is once you've cooked that grain, you've broken down the solids to the point where they're hard to separate from the liquids.
Okay.
So for things like bourbon and rye and Irish pot still, we're going to distill on grain and we're going to ferment on grain.
Okay.
Where for malt whiskey, we're going to lauter like beer.
Right.
And ferment and then distill off grain.
Gotcha.
And that's why, if you'll notice, this doesn't have a big door. There isn't a false bottom. There's just a
right
giant sump, and what comes out of it looks like porridge.
Mm-hmm.
It functionally is porridge.
Mush.
And so we put that into the fermenters. So let's go take a look at the fermenters.
Okay. So these are the fermenters.
So these are the fermenters. So basically, these are just giant stainless steel tanks. You'll notice there's a control box on each one. That's because they're glycol temperature controlled. And all that does is when they get too hot, we have a jacket that cools them down so that the yeast stays happy. Now what happens is we're going to bring our unfermented beer or our porridge, if you will, from the lauter or the mash tun. In each case, it's really a sugar and water and other chemical solution.
Right.
And we're going to put it in these tanks and we're going to put yeast in there. Now, yeast is a living creature. Mm-hmm. And what yeast does is it literally eats sugar and defecates alcohol, CO2, and other chemicals. Mm-hmm. And so some of those chemicals are things we want, some of those things we don't want, but the vast majority is alcohol and CO2. And so what's going on in this tank right now is it's full of essentially beer. The yeast is in there, the yeast is chomping away.
Right.
And the reason the power is on is so that as the temperature gets too high, the glycol jackets will turn on, it'll cool it down a little bit, so the environment is nice and comfortable.
Got you.
It'll bounce a little bit, but it's nice and comfortable for that yeast to be happy and just continue to munch away.
So its own little world in there.
Its own little world in there that yeast is eating, it's reproducing.
Okay.
The whole cycle of life's going on. To be blunt, it's pooping out alcohol and CO2. And when we're
Such
done,
a visual.
when we're done, we're going to have a 7.5% to 9%, depending on what we're doing, alcohol by volume liquid. That's basically a beer.
Right.
But it's not carbonated. It's got no hops in it.
And it comes out this jet down here?
It'll come down out that fitting there, and we're going to pump it into the big still over here. So let's take a look at that.
So this thing is monstrous.
It's actually not. It's pretty small for what it does.
Really? This thing, I mean, just looking at it, it just totally, like, again, nerding out, Dr. Frankenstein, and it's just so immense to me, because this is awesome.
Thank you. This is a classic, what's called an alembic or a pot still. This is a Scottish-style whiskey still. It was custom built for us by Specific Mechanical in Victoria, British Columbia. It is a slightly modified version of their standard large Scottish-style still. A larger sump, so I can put lots of solids in there.
Okay.
I can use this for gin and botanical spirits as well, but we predominantly use it for whiskey. We're going to take that 7.5% to 9% alcohol liquid or porridge. We're going to put it in here and we're going to slowly heat it up. And we're going to do what's called stripping. What that means is we're going to extract a mixture of alcohol, water, and other things. And it's going to come out the parrot behind you. And when we're done, we'll have a big tank that we can move around full of 21 to 24% alcohol and water combined.
Okay.
With, again, other flavor components. And we call that low wines. And then we're going to take that low wines and we're going to go into the next room and we're going to turn that into whiskey.
And all of the stuff, the mash and everything and the mush is still left behind, or how much of that is left?
So a bunch of that is left behind. Mm-hmm. It's either liquid or a combination of liquid and solids, depending on what we put in. If it's all liquid, we call it pot ale. And that material, regardless of what it is, at this point, we'll extract the solids and send that to the farms, the ranches. And the liquids go to the effluent plant here in Golden, which is owned by Coors. So we feed into the Golden Sanitary, which goes right to the Coors effluent plant.
Wow, okay.
This is our H3 room.
Okay.
So
sounds impressive.
an H3 room is a room that is much more fire retardant, if you will.
Okay.
So this particular room has 8-hour firewalls. It's got a much higher density of sprinklers. The entire floor is panned. It's got a much higher density of high volume drains.
Okay.
So that if, God forbid, we ever have a fire event, everything flushes into the sewer and out. So we are in one of the safest distilleries in the country right now. We have heavily modified this building, and it's not just this room, but the entire building. We took a light industrial building and converted it into a world-class distillation facility. So this room is used for two purposes. One, we have our spirit still, currently our one still in here, our one large still.
Okay.
We are obviously running stills elsewhere, but because of the volume this puts out, it's in the more safe room.
Okay.
But two, if you look at this room, it's actually designed to hold 4 of these.
So there's more of these bad boys coming.
Correct. This is give or take 1,000 liters.
Okay.
And we're gonna fill this with 21 to 24% alcohol low wine.
Okay.
And we're going to get about 30% of that back as spirit ready to go into a cask.
Wow.
So this is the still that I mentioned earlier that's the scale up of that Black Forest still from next door.
And is this the one you created?
I designed it. There's no other still like this in the world.
Wow.
The still design is really an older German style of design with a reflux condenser.
Okay.
But I actually designed this particular still to replicate that older German still you saw next door.
Right.
On a much larger scale. And over the next 2 years, we will add 2 to 3 more of these stills in here. And we'll use this for single malt whiskeys. We'll use this for small amounts of bourbon and rye that we do for ourselves and other people. We do a lot of weird limited releases. This one will be called Golden Moon Pandemic 7-grain bourbon. I love it. It was distilled first on that still and then this still.
Okay.
And the story behind that is we took our friends at Root Shoot Malting up in Fort Collins during the height of the early days of the pandemic when everyone needed hand sanitizer.
Right.
We shifted production into hand sanitizer, which we largely donated or sold at cost, depending on who it was going to. We didn't sell it for a profit.
Okay.
And so Root Shoot came down and said, why don't we give you a bunch of corn to help defer the cost?
Oh, that's nice.
And we said, that's very cool. So what we did is we took all that corn they gave us, we took all the odds and ends from all the prototyping we do for other people. We ended up with a 7-grain combination that's about 60% corn. Turned that into a whiskey, which is aging out now, and that will be released later this year as Golden Moon Pandemic 7-grain bourbon, with a whole story of Root Shoot and hand sanitizer and everything on the back label.
Right.
And so everything that is distilled that says Golden Moon comes off of either this still or the small stills next door.
All right, let's go look at some barrels.
Let's go look at some barrels.
Because this is what I'm curious about. So this is the barrel room.
This is one of the barrel rooms.
This is spectacular. So in our podcast, you talked about casks and barrels and aging and went into the technical side of it.
Right.
Which there's a lot of misinformation.
Let's not call it misinformation, incomplete information.
Incomplete information, because there is still some validity to it.
What I said was, most whiskey is aged in what's called an American Standard barrel. American Standard barrel is a 53-gallon whiskey barrel, typically made of American oak, but it doesn't have to be. Typically thin stave, and that really comes from the late 1800s, the Industrial Revolution period. It's not the optimal way to make whiskey, it's the optimal way to mass produce whiskey. And so because that standard barrel size is used, there's standard racking, there's standard material handling equipment, there's standard aging numbers, which is the numbers you all see. Those are all based on the ratios of a 53-gallon barrel. And everything in the US, as I talked about the other day, is aged in, at least initially, in new oak. And then everything in Scotland and Ireland and on a lot of other places is aged in used oak, which are used American barrels. Really all these numbers you see as far as age are tied to the ratio of liquid to surface area to environmental interaction that comes with that 53-gallon barrel from the Industrial Revolution. As I said before, here at Golden Moon, we use a variety of different sizes and types of barrels. And the reason being is we want to change those ratios. A smaller barrel is going to give you a higher ratio. So the barrel below me here, what we would call a blood tub, and it's called a blood tub because it's the size and style of barrel that used to be put under a butcher's table to catch blood.
Okay, Captain Jack Sparrow special, I like it.
Well, it's funny because in America, I'd never heard the term, and I started working in Ireland, and all the distillers in Ireland call it blood tubs. And I'm like, I like that term.
That's great.
It's the same size barrel. I like that term. That's a blood tub.
It's a blood tub.
Okay.
I like it.
It's a small barrel, somewhere between 20 and 24, 25 liters. And these little barrels, well, there's people who say small barrels make bad whiskey. It's not true. And so some of the biggest medals we've ever won, so both our double gold medals at the World Spirits Competition in San Francisco were predominantly either partially or fully aged in these small barrels.
Oh, okay.
Allows you to produce a product much quicker, but you have to have a gentle hand. If you put whiskey into a larger barrel and it sits for a longer period of time, a lot of things that in a smaller barrel will result in negative flavors. Those chemicals will volatilize out over a longer period of time in a bigger barrel. So if you're gonna use a smaller barrel, you have to be a little bit careful on what you put in there. There's a lot more room for error with a larger barrel.
Okay.
You can get higher yield because your cuts can be a little looser. You can get more tails, you can get more heads a little bit, and some of that material will volatilize out over time and become very good whiskey over time in a large barrel, where with a small barrel, you're gonna get a different result. So smaller barrels are just, again, one of the tools that we use here at Golden Moon. Next, in size, we're gonna go to these things. Now this is a 20-gallon torpedo. We use 20-gallon and 30-gallon torpedoes here at Golden Moon. This particular one is a 20-gallon, again, made in Arkansas, same cooperage. Our 30 gallons are made at a wine cooperage in California out of Hungarian oak. And the whole logic here is, again, we're playing off ratios. Think about this as basically an American Standard barrel size stave with like a 10-gallon head. So we believe that whiskey that sits for 2 years in this barrel will be very close in approximation to a whiskey that sat 4 years in an American Standard barrel.
Oh, wow.
Different type of oak, you're going to get a different type of
different flavors.
Different flavors or different influence. We use these again to allow us to adjust levels of extraction, and then as we finalize our products, we can blend across multiple barrel sizes to get the right flavor level, if you will.
Right.
Then the next size barrel we use is this on the top right here.
Right.
This is an American Standard barrel.
And I think this is what everyone visualizes when they're like, you know,
But there's
whiskey barrels.
There's 2 different size barrels here.
Really? Okay. See,
Okay.
the untrained eye, everyone.
Okay, there's 2 different barrels here. So that's an American Standard barrel.
Okay.
So that's 53 gallons, 200 liters.
Okay.
Then we have these barrels. These barrels are typically French Limousin oak. They're what is commonly called a hogshead. Ours are 225 liters, or a Bordeaux barrel, if you will.
Okay.
A true hogshead is really 250 liters, but most people in the industry now consider the 225 wine barrel as a hogshead.
Okay.
Thicker stave, toasted inside, not charred, French oak. And the vast majority of these that we get have previously held port-style California wine.
And then you have these big bad boys.
Well, so these are, again, more American Standard barrels.
Okay.
So some of these have come out of Montagna rum, our friend Karen Hoskins up in Crested Butte, where they previously held rum, and now they're holding gunfighter rum finish. And then last but not least, we have this thing. Now this thing...
This looks like a museum piece.
This is a size barrel, depending on where it comes from, that's called a butt or a punt. Okay?
Okay.
So a butt is typically from Spain and would typically be a little longer and a little narrower, but the same size as this. A punt is typically from Portugal, and they hold a variety of different types of wines. This one happens to be full of Colorado single malt, and it's its 3rd run through. Prior to that, it held a California wine. One of the things that allows us to do is the more different inputs we get into our malt whiskeys,
Right.
the more complexity we can build and we can blend across.
So now, after all of this, comes the moment of truth,
The moment of truth.
the tasting.
We're gonna walk next door and drink a little whiskey.
Yeah!
Let's go.
Yes!